Hello. The purpose of this video is to demonstrate the procedure for updating the firmware on the Snap programmers. Now, an issue has popped up in the lab where the Snap programmers aren't working properly out of the box because the firmware, which is basically just the code on the programmer that runs the programmer, that code needs to be updated, or the firmware needs to be updated. And so I'm going to demonstrate how to do that. And I'm going to be demonstrating it using the Windows operating system. So I'm personally running a Mac, so I'm actually running Windows in a virtual machine inside my Mac. And the MP Lab environment, programming the AVR chip works totally fine on Mac OS, so you can absolutely do all your labs with the Mac operating system or the Linux operating system. It just appears that this particular firmware upgrade operation is not reliable on the Mac. So I have updated the firmware on the Snap programmer using Mac OS directly, but it's really unreliable. Sometimes I get it after 2 tries, sometimes even after 6 or 8 tries it hasn't worked. But it seems to work pretty reliably on Windows. So just for the purposes of updating this firmware, you will need to have access to a Windows machine. If you are running Mac OS or Linux, we will set up an alternate way to get you a properly updated Snap programmer. Most likely we'll set up kind of a help desk in the lab where you can take in your old programmer and get a new one that has the updated firmware. But if you do have access to a Windows machine and you want to get started, I'd really appreciate you sort of going through these steps to see if you can update the programmer yourself, because that'll make things a lot less hectic in the lab. Okay, so I've got MP Lab open in Windows here, and I've got my Snap programmer on my circuit. This board has just got a bit of a hobby project that I'm working on, so it's not, don't worry about all of this hardware. The main thing is I've got an AVR chip right here that I'm just going to hook the programmer up to, just to make sure that our flashes work properly. And within MP Lab, what you do is you start out by hitting the debug menu, select Hardware Tool, Emergency Boot Firmware Recovery, click past the warning, select Snap, and then you get basically what we're going to do in this video is just follow the instructions. So connect the micro USB cable to the Snap programmer. So this micro USB is, we're going to hook this into the Snap. Now I'm running Windows inside a virtual machine. So you're going to see some virtual machine messages pop up. You're not going to get this, obviously, if you've got a native installation of Windows. So I've plugged in the Snap programmer. Step 2 is using some small tweezers, or you can use just one of the wires from the labs. We need to short jumper 3 together. So there's a picture on the inside MP Lab. Jumper 3, if I can get it close to the camera here. Jumper 3 is that jumper right there. There's a little J3. You can't see it, I'm sure, in the video, but there's a little J3 written on the Snap programmer. And so you use some small tweezers to short jumper 3 together. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to squeeze those two things together for 1 second. Oops, my focus is off. That was longer than 1 second, obviously. Then we need to wait for 10 seconds. And that's about 10 seconds. Then disconnect the Snap. Reconnect the Snap. And now we're in boot recovery mode. So we click Next. And then it says disconnect the Snap again. So that's exactly what we're going to do. And next again, this stage it's, I don't know, pulling up some driver list or something like that. I don't know why it doesn't want the programmer connected, but it doesn't. Now we reconnect to the USB port. We hit next. So this is good. We've connected to the serial port. So this COM6, it might not be COM6 on your machine, it might be COM something else, but the main thing is communications configuration succeeded. Now we click next, and we get this working, erasing, we're writing. And that's it, done, 100%. And then if it all works correctly, it'll say boot firmware restored successful. You need to unplug your hardware tool and plug it back in again. The next time the programming environment attempts to connect to this tool, new application firmware will be downloaded. So I'm going to show you that in the next step. Okay, I'm just going to hit finish here. I'm going to unplug and then plug the programmer back in. You'll see that the little active LED has lit up. That's important. You know, again, I've got my virtual machine messages here. I'm gonna just connect the Snap programmer to Windows. Now, I'm also gonna hook up the Snap programmer to my circuit. So this red wire is connected to VDD. So I'm gonna plug that into pin 2. Yeah, that's pin 2. Ground is connected into pin 3. And then the UPDI connection is connected into pin 4, right? So that's all hooked up properly. Now, inside MPLab, I've just got the simplest possible test project here. I've created this exactly like described in the Lab 1 handout. I've got just the new AVR main default file. This is nothing. There's just like a while loop here. But I can still compile it and load it into the chip just to test to make sure the programmer's working. So I'm going to hit the Make and Program Device button. It's going to say snap not found, and that's because, you know, I created this project without a snap programmer. But now we see that the snap programmer is from the list here. So I'm going to select it, click OK. Now we're going to get the compile output, build successful, that's good. Connecting to programmer. So now we're getting this downloading new firmware for target device, and this is loading new firmware into the programmer, and this only happens once, right? So this is going to take a little while. Don't unplug anything while this is going on, because I think, oh, and here's my virtual machine wondering what to do. So I think if you unplug this, you'll probably brick the programmer, and you'll have to start the firmware process all over again. So anyways, I got to completion. It said low target voltage detected. And that's because I don't have the power supply turned on. So let me do that. Hook up power to this little fellow. I'm going to try this again. Now this time we're going to see build successful. We're not going to see that firmware download message. And there we go. Worked no problem. So the reason why I had to redo it again was just because I didn't have the power hooked up to my circuit. But you can see now when I use the programmer again, there's no firmware download. It just goes straight to connecting to MP Snap. This only config settings have been explicitly declared. That warning message always shows up. That's no problem. The main thing that you want to look for is programming/verify complete. If you see that, your programmer works fine and you're ready to proceed with, I guess, the rest of 369.